recording. Okay, if you want to offer a word of prayer.
Yes. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for another opportunity to come together and study your words. Please be with us. Help us to understand the things that you were trying to reveal to us. Help us to understand the remarks, the symbology, the numbers, the dates, the patterns, the symbols. Please give us clarity of thought. Give me also the words to speak. Let the Holy Spirit shine His light upon our hearts. Open our hearts that we are willing, able to see what is good. Bless this meeting, Lord. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, so we were going to look at the Millerite history repeated, what you had said about that, correct?
Right. Correct.
And if you want, you can share your paper.
Yeah, let me
Share your
screen. So, yeah, we were talking last week about the possibility of a Sunday law occurring at 9/11. We talked about that. And, I promised to come back to look up some quotes, a few quotes, where it seems to be suggested that Sunday law will be enforced because of the increasing calamities. I don't know if you remember that, Theodore.
Well, yeah, so my study is that we see these because you're going to have a Sunday law in the United States, and that's going to cause national ruin, and that's going to help escalate the Sunday law, especially as it goes to the world. So, because the Sunday law happens in stages. So, yeah, you have a position that it's these calamities that cause the Sunday law to begin with in the first place, which I don't find that support in the spirit of prophecy, and that's not what we've taught from the beginning. But definitely, they do have a part to play in the escalation of the Sunday law, and especially when you get to the plagues as well. It's going to end up with the death decree during the time of the plagues, and so yeah, how that escalates and exactly what happens. I think we've made a lot of assumptions about the Sunday law, and we're trying to understand this better.
Yeah. So I looked up a few quotes that may give some information about the sequence of events. Is it okay to briefly address them?
Yeah. So some prophecy quotes. Which ones are they? We got here.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
So the first one goes like some southern watchman. It reads, men in responsible positions will not only ignore and despise the Sabbath themselves, but from the sacred desk will urge upon the people the observance of the first day of the week, leading tradition and custom in behalf of this man-made institution. They will point to calamities on land and sea, to the storms of wind, the floods, the earthquakes, the destruction by fire, as judgments indicating God's displeasure, because Sunday is not sacredly observed.
Mhm.
So to me, it seems to suggest that because of the calamities, increasing calamities on land and sea, that it will be seen as the judgment, as judgments of God. And for that reason, they will um, suggest that it might be because that we do not observe the Sunday.
Mhm. Yeah, and we already understand that as as they as we see the Sunday laws beginning to be put into place, you're going to have this more and more reasons why they're going to uh, enforce it more strictly. So
Yes.
so we understand this. Uh, the question is it just that the first Sunday law comes in only after all these calamities? And there are other statements which we could bring into play dealing with the Sunday law. Uh,
But let's read a few more.
what's that?
Let's read a few more.
Yeah.
Not very long. The next one goes like, it's from LT. I don't know what LT stands for. 29, 1905. Says the work has begun in Washington, D.C. None too soon. It should have been started there 25 years ago. At present, there is a strong agitation in favor of a Sunday law. For the District of Columbia, and our workers are laboring with all their might to present the facts regarding the Bible Sabbath and to prevent the enforcement of a Sunday law. The daily papers are publishing articles on both sides of the question. So I included this quote because it talks about agitation,
Mhm.
and we uh, we always believe that before a Sunday law will be implemented, there will be first a agitation.
Yeah, and that's what we saw in the 90s. There was a strong agitation for
But,
Sunday law in the 1990s.
but what was there really? Because
Oh yeah, like was there really? That's
yeah,
yes, it was very strongly agitated. You had the
but
majority that was pushing for Sunday laws. Um, it was strongly agitated in the 90s. Um, now a lot of it was under the guise of anti-abortion as well. So anti-abortion was a big issue, but tied with it was the call for Sunday observance. So that was
we didn't
large.
we didn't really see it.
What's that?
We didn't really see it in the newspapers or on the news in a sense that
Well,
information, right?
well, we did in the 90s. Seventh-day Adventists in the 90s saw it. I mean, Jeff documents it quite well in his presentations that he was doing in the 90s.
Okay.
And Ellen White's talking about being widely agitated in her day. It was also widely agitated in the 1880s as well. She's talking here in that first quote in 1905. I would think that it was even more strongly agitated in the 1990s than even what they saw then.
Okay. I would like to see some.
Well, if you read Jeff's notebooks, which we're going to go, he documents that. And I knew other people who were documenting what was going on in the 90s as well. Was it front page news? Not very often, but it was still the agitation was going on.
All right. These are the last three.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reads, while appearing as a great physician who can heal all the maladies, Satan will bring disease and disaster. Until populous cities are reduced to ruin, in accidents by sea and land, in great conflagrations, in fierce tornadoes and hailstorms, in tempests, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, and earthquakes in 1,000 forms. Satan is exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish. And then it says, and then the great deceiver will persuade man to charge other trouble on those who, obedience to God's commandments, is a perpetual reproof to transgressors. It will be declared that man offend God by the violation of Sunday, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced.
Okay.
So,
So where would you put this statement in time?
sorry?
Because you got Satan appearing as a great physician. So would you put it as Satan's personation of Christ?
Yeah, I wonder what this would mean. We know that he will appear as
Okay.
Christ.
So if this is so if this is Satan's personation of Christ, where do you place that in the lines?
I'm not sure if this is the impersonation of Christ, because we see him in stages, right? We say first he will come as a physician, and then after he will come as an impersonation of Christ. So I don't know if this is the moment where he will appear as Christ himself.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the questions I would have. So we know that the Sunday law is progressive. If this is talking about Satan's personation of Christ when he appears as a great physician, because she uses that description dealing with his personal deception when he comes pretending to be Christ.
Yeah.
That would be after the close of probation.
Yeah, but I underlined these words like Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced.
Right.
What do we understand by this? How do we?
Well, we know that the Sunday law is progressive. So the first Sunday laws are not universal in the first place. You're going to have Sunday laws in the United States. So we know that when it's going to be strictly enforced, that's going to be with the death decree. And so that's after the close of probation. Right.
I was thinking the Sunday law, the Sunday observance, it being strictly enforced, it means, like it says in the next quote, just the implementation of laws. I mean, if you read the next quote, it says Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they think as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are a result of Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. So before there was no law, before the calamities, seem to suggest, and because of the calamities, they are going to make laws enforcing Sunday observance. So
yeah. So again, you're just all you're talking about is that you're having calamities, and these calamities are going to cause more in strict Sunday laws, which is already the position we take. So this has never been denied. What we recognize is that these calamities are the result of the United States departing from the Constitution and beginning this work of enforcing Sunday. So when they start this work, and calamities come as a result, the reason they're going to interpret those calamities as the reason that they're not enforcing Sunday strictly enough. And so they're going to increase, as they move through time, the type of enforcement that's going to happen with Sunday observance. In some ways, the initial Sunday laws are more of an inconvenience. They're not being strictly enforced. But as time goes on, that's going to increase because of the calamities. That's how they're going to interpret the calamities. They're not going to see them as a result of them departing from God in regard to the Sunday. So when you take this statement here from manuscript releases, it's also in Maranatha. I'm trying to find like the whole statement. But she says here, as men depart further and further from God, Satan is permitted to have power over the children of disobedience. He hurls destruction upon men. There is calamity by land and sea. Property and life are destroyed by fire and flood. Satan resolves to charge this upon those who refuse to bow to the idol which he has set up. His agents point to Seventh-day Adventists as the cause of the trouble. These people stand out in defiance of the law, they say. They desecrate Sunday. They were compelled to obey the law for Sunday observance. There would be a cessation of these terrible judgments. So we can see that the Sunday law is already in place when these calamities come. She then says calamities will come, calamities most awful, most unexpected, and these destructions will follow one after another. If there will be a heeding of the warnings that God has given, and if churches will repent, returning to their allegiance, then other cities may be spared for a time. So that's one of the things that's interesting, is that cities are going to be hit with these judgments as a result of a Sunday law that is already in place. But if men have been deceived, who have been deceived, continue in the same way in which they have been walking, disregarding the law of God and presenting falsehoods before the people, God allows them to suffer calamity, that their senses may be awakened. The judgments will be according to the wickedness of the people and the light of truth that they have had. If they have had the truth, according to that light will be the punishment. Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they, leading men, think, as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are the result of Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. So you can see they already have laws, Sunday laws in place, but Seventh-day Adventists aren't bowing to those. They're in defiance of those laws. And so the calamities that come then are going to be interpreted as the result of disobedience of these Sunday laws rather than as the result of these Sunday laws. And this we've taught for a long time. So this is not something new. To me, this would be pretty standard Adventist understanding of how the Sunday laws come about, based upon the statements in the spirit of prophecy. So we already know that, yes, Sunday laws are going to come as a result of these calamities. So keep going.
Yeah, so the last quote, it says, laws enforcing the observance of Sunday as the Sabbath will bring about a national apostasy. So will bring about the national apostasy from the principles of republicanism. And I think she's referring to the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
Upon which the government has been founded. The religion of the papacy will be accepted by the rulers, and the law of God will be made void. So I'm trying to suggest that these laws to enforce the observance of Sunday, it will bring about a national apostasy.
Right.
So,
right. So we know that the initial Sunday laws bring about the national apostasy, which then brings the calamities. That's what we we find in the spirit of prophecy.
Yeah, so
You're saying that the national calamity or national ruin is going to precede the Sunday law. But
no,
that's not what she's saying here. She's saying that a
No.
Sunday law is going to come, and that will bring about national apostasy, and national apostasy will be followed by national ruin. And those will bring about increased, stricter and stricter Sunday laws to try to get God's
what I'm
people.
trying to say, what I'm trying to say is that there's this order of we'll first see calamities, then we'll see the agitation of a Sunday law, then we'll see a Sunday law, then we'll see the national apostasy, and then we see national ruin in that order.
But you think calamities come first?
Yes, that's the
Based on what? So we haven't seen you show something that shows that. And Ellen White's quite clear that that's not how it happens.
I think based upon these quotes, I was trying to show that, but
Yeah, but these quotes are only showing us that when there's calamities, it's going to bring about a stricter enforcement of Sunday. And she even is quite clear about that, of that this is much later, that this isn't the initial Sunday law. So you have a Sunday law that comes about. This is going to bring about calamities. Those calamities will increase the strictness of the Sunday laws. Like here's Review and Herald, December 18th, 1888. A time is coming when the law of God is, in a special sense, to be made void in our land. The rulers of our nation will, by legislative enactments, enforce the Sunday law, and thus God's people will be brought into great peril. When our nation, in its legislative councils, shall enact the laws to bind the consciences of men in regard to their religious privileges, enforcing Sunday observance, and bringing oppressive power to bear against those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath, the law of God will, to all intents and purposes, be made void in our land, and national apostasy will be followed by national ruin.
right. And
Yeah,
I believe that the national ruin that will follow national apostasy is the surrendering of its sovereignty to the United Nations. The United States has more or less ceased to exist as an independent country. But yeah, I think that there needs to be, I believe there needs to be some form of, let me say, it needs to be a very good reason to implement a Sunday law. Otherwise, people will very much object to it and would have little chance of succeeding, I believe. I mean,
I know you keep saying this because you think that the Sunday law can only come about if there's some crisis that is the judgments of God of some way are coming upon the land, and so this crisis is going to cause them to initiate a Sunday law. Now,
like for instance, the with this Corona, everybody was how do you call it? Forced to wear a mask or all these mask regulations.
And that becomes a type of the Sunday law.
Yeah, and people start objecting to that. In many cities, people object to those measures, closing of shops, etc., and wearing these mouthpieces. So I think that if there will be a Sunday law, just more or less without any good reason, people would object to that also
Yeah,
much
okay,
more than.
okay, but you say this, but I don't quite understand why. So, I mean, what do you
Because
mean by a good reason? There's all kinds of reasons that they're going to have.
Mhm.
You know, right now, back in the 90s, I mean, the reason was, you know, America's falling apart. There's all this immorality. We need to go back to God. We need to get people to go to church on Sunday again. You know,
Yeah.
all those types of things were happening in the 90s. Now, the world has changed. And that's why I'm interested in this next part of what you're saying about Millerite line and our parallels. Because I think this is an important point that we need to take into consideration. But they can have almost any kind of reason. They could have environmental reasons. They could say, we're doing this for the environment, we're doing it for the family. You know, they can have lots of different reasons. So how it's going to happen, I don't think we know exactly, but I don't think we can go against what Ellen White has plainly said. In my reading of what she says regarding the Sunday law, that it begins in the United States. When you have this Sunday law and it's being agitated, and you have Sunday laws start to be enforced, there's going to be God's judgments that come upon the land. God's judgments aren't going to come upon the land when people aren't enforcing Sunday, when they haven't abandoned the Constitution. But the judgments will come upon the land. And when they do, Satan is going to use that to his advantage. He's going to reinterpret it as if they're not enforcing Sunday. Just because you have Sunday law doesn't mean it's going to be strictly enforced. I don't think the original Sunday laws are going to be something that necessarily affect us as much as we would think. We're not going to be put in prison. We're not going to be jailed. They'd be more inconveniences than anything. But what's going to bring that about? I think the interesting thing is what's happening right now in the United States that shows how that can come about without the judgments coming from God first. Those have to be a response to the Sunday law, not the cause of the Sunday law.
Yeah. Okay, but okay, let's leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay.
Final thing, I mean, so you are saying we don't need the calamities first?
No, when we've never taught that we needed the calamities first. We've always taught that the Sunday law comes and then the calamities. We've never taught that the calamities come and then the Sunday law.
But it just seems strange to me that, okay, let's say that there will be a Sunday law sometime, and then calamities start to increase, right?
Yeah, and then that's going to be interpreted by Satan and his agents that we're not bringing about. We need to have stricter Sunday laws instead of causing for them to return to God and to realize that the Sunday laws are the problem. They're going to see the problem is the ones who aren't obeying the Sunday laws, because initially we're not going to obey those Sunday laws. You know, it's going to be an inconvenience, but we're not going to be doing it. There will be a group not keeping the Sunday laws, and then they will look to them as the reason the calamities are coming. That's what Ellen White teaches. That's what we've taught in this movement. I don't see any reason to change that. And you brought statements that state exactly what our position is. You haven't brought a statement that says anything different.
Yeah, I was trying to show that it is because of the calamities in the first place that will call for Sunday.
I know what you're trying to do, but I don't see that it says that the calamities caused the Sunday law in the first place. And we can quite see that they don't, especially based upon the one that appears to be the one when Satan impersonates Christ, which is after the close of probation. a lot of those calamities are going to be after the close of probation in the plagues. And yet they're still going to be trying to get God's people to bow. And that's why the death decree comes about during the sixth plague. But I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're trying to do with these quotes. I just don't think that you're interpreting them correctly in the context in which they're written. And I showed you by the one that you put there, and it's pretty clear that the Sunday law comes first, then the calamities. The one that I read. You took the part where it talks about the Sunday law coming in response to calamities, but the Sunday law begins first, then the calamities, then the Sunday law becomes more strictly enforced. So,
Yeah, it just seems strange to me that, okay, we have a Sunday law. If I would be the one to make this Sunday law, for instance, and then suddenly I see calamities increase, it seems strange to me that I would blame some people that do not keep Sunday law.
well, but that's what she says. Read the statement again. As men depart further and further from God, Satan is permitted to have power over the children of disobedience. He hurls destruction upon men, right? There is calamity by land and sea. Property and life are destroyed by fire and flood. Satan resolves to charge this upon those who refuse to bow to the idol which he has set up. His agents point to Seventh-day Adventists as the cause of the trouble. These people stand out in defiance of law, they say. They desecrate Sunday. Were they compelled to obey the law for Sunday observance, there would be a cessation of these terrible judgments. So in order for this to come about, you can't say that they stand out in defiance of law, because most people aren't observing Sunday right now, right? Like nobody's observing Sunday. Why would you single out the Seventh-day Adventists? So that means that there has to be a law set in place that everyone else is observing, but Seventh-day Adventists aren't. You understand what I'm saying? So you wouldn't be able to single them out. You would just say, well, nobody's keeping Sunday, right? So you have to have had a Sunday law in the first place. And the context of this is after the Sunday laws have already begun, that you get these calamities.
Yeah, what I'm trying to understand is, so we have a Sunday law.
Yeah.
And then suddenly things get worse.
Right. That's what happened.
Then I would think it would be better to have no Sunday law at all, because it seems to be because of the Sunday law that things get worse.
Okay, except that Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they, the leading men, think, as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are the result of Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. So, I mean, we know nobody's keeping Sunday right now. You wouldn't be able to single these people out. So when these calamities are happening, and you have a Sunday law in place, but you have a group that's not following it, they're, instead of saying maybe our Sunday laws are the problem, they're going to say the problem is the ones who aren't following the Sunday law. And those are the people which are Seventh-day Adventists. Everyone else is really going to go along with the Sunday law. But once you get that Sunday law in place and you have the calamities happening, then you have this next interpretation of those events, which is going to start to bring Sunday law to be strictly enforced. Because initially, the Sunday laws are not going to be strictly enforced. Not obeying them is going to be an inconvenience. It's not going to be a life and death matter. Most of the world will just go along with it, just like they did with the Mass. But there will be a group that isn't going to go along with it. That's going to be what here is called Seventh-day Adventist. So I understand what you're saying, but the initial Sunday law has to be in place for this to make any sense. But it's not a major Sunday law. It's not a death decree. It's not, it's not initially, it's not even going to affect our Sabbath keeping when the first Sunday laws come.
Yeah, I understand.
Right. So part of this stricter Sunday laws is not just about the Sunday itself. It's ultimately going to be about putting pressure up on those that are keeping the Sabbath. So it's not going to be some huge Sunday law that people are going to have a problem with. People are going to go along with the Sunday law. It's going to fit. The media is going to promote it. The governments are going to promote it. It's going to be for some good, but there's going to be people who aren't going to conform. That's the way that we've always understood it. And I don't see that these statements that you've taken tell us anything different.
Yeah, I agree with a lot. I just believe that it takes a crisis to get to the point. But
well, it could take imaginary crises. I mean, we did see, obviously we have the environmental crisis as such, but we just had a pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
And in some ways that did bring about a call, some places in Canada, stores were closed on Sunday.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because, and so I think that this is part of what's going to happen, that there's going to be a call for Sunday observance that isn't necessarily going to be as, it's not going to be the strict Sunday law. It's going to be something that everybody's going to accept and see as good. That's the way that we've always understood it. In the 90s, what we saw is that there was this call by the moral majority, to have family time and family values. It was extremely popular, this idea that we need to go back to the way things were. And that's how people saw Trump, what he was going to do when he says, I'm going to make America great again. Most people believed he was going to try to go back to the past, when stores were closed on Sunday and people went to church on Sunday and so forth. Of course, that never happened. Now, that's why I want to get into this next part of what you have, because I think it's pretty important. Okay, so you need to
trying to
what are you trying to find?
This quotes from, I think it was Robert Pike. He was trying to show the corona crisis being used for Sunday law legislation. It was very interesting to see.
Well, we do know that crises are going to be used for Sunday law legislation. So, okay, so
like this quotes about stores closed on Sunday because of corona in Slovenia, in Puerto Rico because of corona. They have Sunday law. Businesses closed on Sundays, etc., etc.
Yeah. So we saw all this type of thing, but I want to get into this parallel here that we have with Millerite history, because
yeah, okay, let's go there.
Yeah,
but
because we got about 50 minutes.
But this is an interesting quote. I mean,
okay,
this is the paper from the Catholic Register, National Catholic Register, and it reads, have we sometimes failed to honor the Lord by keeping the Lord's Day? So it's talking about the coronavirus. Have we treated Sundays just like any other day, as a time to go shopping, get work done, and pursue our own agenda, instead of taking time to deepen our relationship with Jesus and relax with family and friends? In the Old Testament, God decreed that Judah would go into exile for a time corresponding to all the Sabbaths that they had broken, until the land had retrieved its Lord's Sabbath. So it's using the coronavirus pandemic to promote Sunday rest. Pope Francis, I think, said this in a prayer service.
Mhm. March 27th.
Yeah, interesting date.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's quite convenient then this coronavirus can be used in this way then to promote. So, yeah, but I don't think it's coincidence, but yeah, it's
Yeah. But the whole point that you're making is you're saying that in the 90s, that a Sunday law wasn't imminent, which we believe it was, and that the attack that happened at 9/11 changed the picture of what was going to happen, and it delayed that initial Sunday law that was going to happen in the United States. That's the position that we've taken. Now you're saying that actually without 9/11 we couldn't have had a Sunday law, right? Right, which I
Yeah.
don't agree. I don't think you need 9/11 for a Sunday law to come about. But of course, hindsight's 50-50 to see how things would have unfolded if it hadn't been for 9/11. It's hard to say. But
Yeah.
we do know that the reasons initially for the Sunday law aren't because of the tragedies that are happening in the land, the judgments of God, because judgments of God are not going to fall until after the Sunday law. That's pretty clear in the spirit of prophecy. Now, God gives us warnings about things that can happen. So we do have, natural disasters increase and so forth. But these are not the judgments of God that she's talking about, the calamities that are of a surprising nature that are going to come after the Sunday law is enacted. And that's going to escalate the strictness of that enforcement of that Sunday law. But now when we get to our history, the parallel with Millerite history, which is where we need to go.
All right, let's go there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Millerite history repeated. It's not very long. So I'm trying to compare Millerite history with what happened July 18. We always said that Millerite history will repeat to the very letter. And before July 18, 2020, we believed that July 18 would be symbolically the second coming for the priest. And we lined up this waymark with October 22nd, 1844, which the Millerites believed to be the second coming, right? So, so far so good. So according to this logic, we should expect to see the same thing happening on July 18, 2020 as on October 22nd, 1844. We should see some similar characteristics. And indeed, just like the Millerites, we did not see our prophecy come to pass in the way that we expected. We did not see anything happen, and great was the disappointment. Just as was the case with the Millerites. And many turned against the July 18 prophecy. We saw FFA turning its back on the July 18 prophecy. And we saw the Omega movement, but that was before, of course, before July 18. But anyway, many turned against the July 18 prophecy, similar to what happened in Millerite history. But despite the lack of official evidence, we know and believe that October 22nd was a valid date. That Christ moved to the most holy place. And according to our logic, we may assume that the same goes for July 18, 2020, that it was indeed a valid date. but we didn't see anything happen.
Mm.
We also know that the October 22nd, 1844 was a test. It served as a test. The disappointment was meant to be. And similarly, we may assume then that also July 18 would have served as a test, just like Miller history, that it was meant to filter out those that had joined for the wrong reason, that had joined our movement for the wrong reason, but had a lack of faith and failed to recognize his voice. So, continuing, should July 18 have come to pass, exactly like we predicted it, thousands or even millions would have joined the movement. And many undoubtedly would have joined for the wrong reasons, just as was the case in Millerite history when over 200,000 people joined the Millerites after the prediction of Josiah Litch came to pass on August 11, 1840. But after the great disappointment, only 50 of those 200,000 people remained. And we have seen a similar thing happening in our movement, when today only a very few people are left that dare to stand for the validity of the July 18 prophecy. But then we saw FFA moving away from our prophecy, and before that, we all believed this prophecy, July 18 prophecy, but after the disappointment, many left the movement, or how do you say, they gave up the July 18 prophecy. They saw that something from Satan, and they thought it was necessary to go back to before July 18, but still that didn't improve the situation. It resulted in a total abandoning of the FFA eventually. So there must have been some other reason then why. What went wrong? Anyway, continuing, the Millerites had no physical evidence to support that claim that Christ went to the most holy place on October 22nd, 1844. And some claim even that the vision of Hiram Edson was just made up to deal with the disappointment. And similarly, we too have no physical evidence to support our July 18 prophecy. And us claiming that the natural visions were conditional can of course be considered as just an excuse to deal with our disappointments. And with no visible evidence, the Millerites just had the prophecies and the word of God to rely on. Similarly, in our case, we have the July 18 study with the patterns, dates, symbols, and structures from the word of God and Millerite history that we need to recognize as the voice of Pamonai. We believe that July 18, 2020 was indeed a valid date. So in the end, it comes down to common sense, discernment, especially faith, just as was the case with Millerites and as it was with Abraham when he had to sacrifice Isaac. And thou shalt not kill went through Abraham's mind concerning the Millerites. He was accused of setting dates of Christ coming, but he knew as well as we do that no man knows the day or the hour of his coming. So that was war against William Miller, the Millerites. And our dilemma was, of course, thou shalt not set time. Jeff was one of the biggest opponents against time setting, right? He
Mhm.
was always against time setting. So in a sense, it was this child, so to say, to offer up. Um, he did so, but
Mhm.
nevertheless, he he took another course.
Yeah, I mean, because when it came to like time setting, any Seventh Day Adventist know we're not going to time set, and so this movement to set the dates that we did, you know, I made the argument from the beginning that we weren't time setting in contradiction of Ellen White's counsel, and one of the things that we saw, at least that I saw, I'm not sure if everybody was on board with that, had to do with the idea that our line was a type. That our line was typical of the bigger line. And what was happening with us was not, you know, for instance, if we were going to look at the parallel that Jeff had always set up with October 22nd, 1844, is he would take 9/11 lines up with the first day of the first month. And then we would have midnight in the midnight cry, and then the Sunday law. And the Sunday law would line up with October 22nd, 1844. But we didn't make the argument that July 18th was a Sunday law.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We actually had December 25th, 2021 as the date that the Sunday law couldn't come before that date. It had to come after that date. You know, maybe the next day. You know, that was sort of the initial idea. Now, when we look at this parallel, so one of the things that we saw in my paper called After July 18. So if you go back to Millerite history being repeated, Millerite history repeated. So we line up July 18th, 2020 with October 22nd, 1844. But of course, we only do that by understanding that this movement is Samuel Snow, and that Samuel Snow's letters are within the Millerite line, are typical of the whole Millerite line. You understand what I'm saying? Do you agree, or do you not know what I?
Yeah,
right? Because really, July 18, 2020 lines up with July 18, 1844. I mean, in reality, if we're gonna really line up Millerite history with our line, we're gonna say we really lined up with Samuel Snow's prediction before midnight letter, right? Because that's 3 days before midnight. It's the prediction before midnight. And so we're going to look at that 3 days as symbolic in Millerite history. And now, but we know also that July 18th, 1844 lines up with October 22nd, 1844, because it's a typical line within a bigger line. So we have this bigger line. Now, Jeff has always put the October 22nd, 1844 as the Sunday law, because that's the closed door for Seventh-day Adventists. And this first part here, where it says, we have always said that Millerite history will repeat to the very letter. I've always thought was a mistake, because the only thing that Ellen White says is that the parable of the 10 virgins has been fulfilled and will be fulfilled to the very letter. She never says Millerite history will repeat to the very letter. Now, it's a fine distinction, but the distinction is that she describes the going forth of the virgins as the first angel's message, and the tarrying time as the period of the second angel's message. So the part that's going to be repeated in our history to the very letter has to do with the first and second angel's messages. And we know that the second angel's message then arrives at 9/11. But within that message, we have this movement. And this movement is like Samuel Snow. He's preparing a message that then is going to be given at Boston and Exeter. And that's what this movement is doing right now. It's preparing a message that's going to be given at Boston and Exeter. And that's going to be midnight, the midnight cry. The Sunday law, in this case, will be the Sunday law, which July 18th definitely was not. And I think this is one of the points that has to be addressed. Now, when we look, if we go back to Nero, because you did some amazing work addressing Nero, the July 18th date, and all of the coincidences, if you want to call them that, having to do with the death of what's his name? His when he becomes emperor and when he dies. So
Nero,
what's that?
Claudius, you mean, or Nero?
Yeah. Yeah, so the one who dies, it's Claudius who dies on October 13th, right?
Yes. Right.
And he begins to rule November 9th. Is that it? I forget now. What was the because we have the November 9th, we have the October 13th date, and we have the July 18th date, all in that history.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, so if we can, yeah, he died in 54 AD, and he died October 13th.
Right.
Right. And then there was also November 9th, right? Where was November 9th?
Yeah.
No, there was another the other date. Oh, no, it was here. Can you scroll up a little bit? So where was this? I'm just trying to remember.
Oh, the close of probation that was linked to Claudius. It was this period from the French Revolution.
Ah, yeah, okay. The number of
It was
days
linked.
between November 9th and January 1st is 54 days.
Correct.
And there was another point. Here, I'm just looking at it on my computer here. June 9th, that's the date. June 9th. Right?
Correct.
And that is Nero reigned from October 13th, 54 AD to June 9th, 68 AD. That's what I was looking at.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? And that's an inversion of the June 9th, 2018 to October 13th, 2018. It's an inversion of those two dates. Okay.
Yes.
But then we also have under Nero, we have the burning of Rome on July 18th.
Yes.
So we have all these different symbols, which we can't deny. Right? I mean, to me, they're just impossible to deny. So we know that Nero is typifying this history. Now part of the thing is we have Tiberius is the one who typifies Trump, right?
Tiberius is what?
Trump is Tiberius,
Trump.
right? So we went, Augustus is going to be the tax guy, so that's going to be Obama, and Julius Caesar is going to be George Bush Jr., right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but now we also have, we have on this list the first 7 Caesars of Rome. So if you go back there, but we know that there's actually 10, right, to the destruction of Jerusalem. And the destruction of Jerusalem is actually the type of the Sunday law, correct?
Right.
So there's something there where we go from Galba, I can't remember the names of all the people, but you get, what's that?
At Galba, Otto, and what's the name?
One more and then
Thespian.
Yeah, yeah, Vespasian.
Right.
So the thing is, there's going to be 10, and that 10 and 7 is important when we look at the 10 kings and then the 7 kings. So there's some work that we need to do there. But my point is that this July 18th of Nero's isn't the Sunday law, it's the midnight cry as you have it marked, right?
Mhm.
And under our midnight cry, we have developed this line, which we would call, the 777 chiasm or something like that, right?
Right.
However we want to call it. And within that, we have a July 18th. And Nero's July 18th lines up with ours, which is a type. Would you agree with that?
Nero's July 18 lines up with what?
With our July 18th as a type.
As a type, yes.
Right. Now, of course, Rome did burn, Nashville didn't. But the thing is, we had all of these different types of things pointing to July 18th and to our different dates, the 26th day of the 4th month, the 10th day of the 5th month, all these different symbols from these different destructions of cities and so forth that we could line up. And as we line them up, it's like taking a medical, anatomy transparency where you line up all these things. And as you put them over top, you get all these characteristics. We don't have Nero's July 18th line up with 9/11, right? Even though 9/11 and July 18th are connected as symbols, right? But we don't have them line up. So when we look at this parallel between Millerite history and ours, the one point that I want to bring out has to do with what happened on January 6th. Because you bring up in your notes, if you go further in your notes, you're going to talk about Trump, right? The Trump prophecy that we gave back in 2015. And you say, despite Biden now being president, I still believe Trump will ultimately be the one stirring up the people against the realm of Grecia, which I understand to be the globalists, perhaps resulting in a civil war in the USA. Now, we already have a civil war in the USA. It's not a hot civil war, but there are people who have covered civil wars in other countries. And they say what you have in the United States is exactly what you're going to have before civil war. It's not going to look like the Civil War necessarily in the 1860s, where, that's kind of a bit more civilized of a civil war, if you want to put it that way. That is, it's governments. Often civil wars are not governments fighting against each other, which it was in the United States history. The governments of the South fighting against the governments of the North. Sometimes civil wars are just complete uprisings, the governments against the people, or the army against the government, things like that. So with this Trump prophecy, what is it that you see? Why are you making the statement that it's going to be Trump again? Because we do know that Trump represents something. Would you say that the King of the South won the battle on January 6th against the King of the North? That is, the Democrats being the King of the South and the Republicans being the King of the North? Would you agree with that? Or would you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't really have any thoughts on that. But I take it from Daniel 11, verse 2, right?
Okay, so in Daniel 11, verse 2, Trump stirs up all against the realm of Grecia. Now, does Xerxes win?
No.
No, he doesn't, right? So this was one of the problems that we had, is that Jeff initially, he was saying, well, the next thing that comes to play is Alexander the Great, and Trump is going to be Alexander the Great. He's going to be the head of the UN. But when we looked at the history, we could see Xerxes, which is Trump, which is Tiberius, you know, he's gonna, as Xerxes, he's gonna stir up all against the realm of Grecia, against the globalists. And we can say that he did. He's already done that, but he's gonna lose that battle. Right? Because he lost that battle. Right? That battle was lost on January 6th. Because on January 6th, that's it for Trump. Before that, maybe there's hope, but what happened at the Capitol building, that's going to put an end to Trump ever being able to do anything about getting back into power at that time. So now we have the globalists in charge of the United States, and you would agree with that. Okay. So what do you see, how do you see Trump coming back in, and what's your reason for Trump himself coming back in?
Yeah, in a way, I was also thinking that perhaps the Capitol Hill, how do you call it?
Well, we call it the Siege of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, the Siege of Washington could have been a fulfillment of this part 2, the last part of Daniel 11, verse 2. Him stirring up all against the realm of Grecia. But what I find interesting is between the Trump getting the court precedent,
yeah,
there is this little column,
yeah,
same that we see in Daniel 11, verse 40, right?
yeah,
The king of the north and then the king of the south. But between those, in Daniel 11, verse 40, between A and B, there's like how many years? 1798 and 1989. More than
yeah, 126 years.
126 years.
Well,
So
from
we see here,
126 years from 1860. Yeah, more than that. That would be 200 and
yeah,
almost 200 years.
yeah. So I found it interesting that you see the same column also in Daniel 11, verse 2. So I'm trying to suggest that perhaps we have the same situation here, that there might be a period of time between A and B, between him getting the next president and him stirring up all against the realm of Grecia in a more literal sense than like civil war.
Yeah, well, so I mean, it's pretty clear that Trump did stir up all against the realm of Grecia before January 6th. January 6th is when he loses. I mean, he had fought this war against, even his first election is him stirring up all against the realm of Grecia. I mean, he's going against the globalists with everything he has. Now, the globalists are coming back with this attack, which is misinformation, all this propaganda. And also, you know, we were taking the position that Trump was going to bring in the Sunday law. But the one thing that Trump wouldn't do is bring in a Sunday law. That is, that would go against everything he believes. He's a constitutionalist, and he had lots of opportunity to act like a dictator, but he didn't. Right? He believes in the freedom of the individual, and he doesn't like big government. I mean, one of his things was really to try to get rid of government, get government out of things, to stop all these regulations, to allow the economy to run freely. So everything that he was doing, he wasn't really a religious person. I mean, he did court, of course, the evangelicals to help get elected, but he wasn't going to bring about a Sunday law. I mean, that became evident as I continued to look at Trump and study what he was doing and what kind of person he was. And so even before the election, I was pretty clear to me that he wasn't going to be the one to bring in the Sunday law. So I don't know if we need Trump to bring in the Sunday law, but we do need Republicans to have a battle, because if they lost the Battle of Raphia on January 6th, they're going to win the Battle of Panium in the future. So at some point, whether it's Trump, and just because of a backlash against what's happened, he's going to allow these restrictions of freedoms to occur, which he wouldn't want to do based on his beliefs. But we could see the backlash bringing about a Sunday law of some sort, but sometimes, trying to clean up the morality of the United States. So the thing is, we don't know. That's part of our problem. Is I feel like we're guessing all the time, and I don't think that we should be doing that. I think we need to figure out how to follow Miller's rules and how to line things up to take all of these histories and put them together to see the picture that we need to see. And that would be the problem with what I see that you're doing, is there's too much guessing. And a lot of I would say that your assumptions or your premises that you're working on are not things that we would accept or that we teach or that we believe. Now, we do agree that God stayed our hand at 9/11, or not 9/11, July 18th, right? Mm-hmm. So I can agree with all of that you laid out in the parallel of Millerite history, that our hand was stayed, and that we can see the parallel between October 22nd and July 18th, even though we're going to put July 18th with Snow's letters, but we know that our hand was stayed. But none of this. Now, you put this statement here at the end, but it basically all comes down to the most important waymark of 9/11 and the question of whether it was an inside job or not. And I don't see that. I don't see the logic in that statement, because we know 9/11 was not an inside job, but you try to put that it is, and our position is that it's not. It's not an inside job. That destroys 9/11. It goes against the foundation that has been laid down by this movement. It's something that Jeff tolerated, but never believed. And I'm not in a position to say anything about it. I mean, I don't have any authority, but I personally don't tolerate it. I think it undoes our message when we make 9/11 an inside job. And I don't see that it ties in with what you're saying. That is, 9/11 is not July 18th. And we have all these other lines. We have lots of other lines that give us additional information that we have to consider. So the reason I believe that the hand was stayed was because of the parallel that we're studying and looking into right now, which has to do with Jonah. So you brought up Abraham, but you also brought up this conditional aspect, which Jeff had brought up. He brought up Jonah and Abraham, both as examples of our July 18th prediction. Right. And in doing so, he had already set the ground for us to understand that if July 18th doesn't occur, it's because it was conditional, and also God would have stayed our hand. So there would have been no reason for somebody to say, well, because July 18, 2020 failed, then that means that we failed. And yet many people in the movement took that position. We know we have to present that message, and we did so faithfully. I don't think that it was a red flag, what they call a false flag event that was somehow withheld. That doesn't actually fit in prophetically. For me, I haven't seen, there's no evidence it's a false flag. Could it be that the government, being warned about what was going to happen on July 18th, was able to stop it? That's even possible, because we know there were people connected with the government high up, with the military, and the military was aware of our prediction. And it is possible that they may have been able to stop that. We just don't know, because they're not going to tell us everything that they do, especially something like that. They're not going to say, yes, these people made this prediction for July 18, 2020, and we stopped it, unless it would be in their interest to do so. So I believe that they did stop it. That's what I believe is the most likely scenario, is that the attack was planned and it was stopped by the intelligence service in the United States. And it's not common knowledge yet because there's no reason for it to be. And I also believe that God had his hand in it, in that there were many people in Nashville who did accept that this attack was going to happen and repented. So that would be another aspect of it. But if you're going to try to argue that it's going to be an inside job, and that becomes that somehow helps our 9/11 way more, because it undoes it as far as I'm concerned. But it also doesn't really help our July 18th prediction. But I do think, so I'm giving you an evaluation of what I think for whatever it's worth. I look at what you did with Nero. I think it's extremely profound and it can't be ignored. I think there are things that we're missing there. We need to look further at the connection between 70 AD and the role that the connection between the burning of Rome and the connection between the destruction of Jerusalem. I think those two are connected as types, as symbols. And you haven't been following our study on Daniel chapter 8, I don't think. But when you look at Daniel chapter 8, and we were looking at the place of his sanctuary, we've come to the conclusion that there are two applications that are possible for us to make to that verse, and that it refers to both Rome and to Jerusalem. And this would fit in really well with what you did with Nero and July 18th, and then what happens with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So there's a lot of little pieces of the puzzle here that you presented that I think are valid. But I don't agree with the conspiracy theory aspect of it. And I don't agree with the idea that a Sunday law was not imminent in 2001. I think it was. I mean, that's what we believed, as Seventh-day Adventists, looking at what was happening in the world, is we saw a Sunday law coming. We saw that it was being agitated, that there was strong movements in that direction. And 9/11 undid that. It just totally turned everything on its head. So now they have to scramble. They had a new enemy to deal with, which was Islam. And so they took their focus upon what they had been planning to do, and now they put this outside. The Patriot Act wasn't really designed so much for Islam as it was for the internal problems within the United States. That is, the United States was really concerned with what had happened at the Oklahoma City bombing and Waco and Ruby Ridge. And those were the things that were really concerning the government at that time in the 90s. They weren't that concerned about Islam, even though Islam had attacked the World Trade Center, just before Waco, 2 days before. But that wasn't really their focus of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act, the purpose of it was to deal with internal rebellion that was going to happen, the fear that they had about all these militias that existed in the United States and still do exist. So I don't know, do you have any final comments on some of that? I mean, do you see the logic of what we're saying?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, yes. And
okay, because I know you haven't been following it, and it's a lot of stuff to follow, right? But I do present some of it in some of my papers, and you could go over it and look at it and then tell me what you think about it. But personally, I think some of the ideas that you're presenting, I would say, are dangerous. And I'm not just saying that to get people all worried about it. I'm just saying that you're not aware of what you're doing in with these things like the conspiracy theories and how dangerous these are to the spiritual life of the individuals who get caught up in them. And so we're having a real huge difficulty here presently with conspiracy theories, and they're undermining the movement in a big way. But yet we also are doing a lot of study that's looking at the foundation and establishing that this movement is solid, that it's going to continue, that God has a purpose for it. And our responsibility is to understand these truths for ourselves. And so, there's, a lot of different things in here that I would just say are speculative. And we did that also with July 18th. Doesn't mean, we were wrong necessarily to look at some of the things, but we speculated when it came to the conclusions that we were drawing from these things. And one of them, for me, that always was the problem was Hiroshima, because Hiroshima definitely, that is such a powerful symbol. All of those dates, the 2 July 27th, the 26th day of the 4th month, August 11th, all these different dates and how they line up. And yet the problem that I had there as a symbol, Japan is Islam, right? Japan is the East, and it's the one getting bombed. It's not, so now we could look at it as, well, this is kind of like a mirror, judgments, the United States attacked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So Nashville and maybe, San Francisco are going to be God's, justice that comes upon the United States or something, which comes from Islam. So we could have looked at it that way. But the only thing is, for me, it was guessing. And I don't like guessing at anything. I don't like speculation. I want to have something that's really, really solid. And in order to be solid, this movement has to come together under Miller's rules and systematically, prayerfully and carefully establish these lines, what our message is going to be. And, I don't think that what you presented here is going to be our message. It's not going to be connected with conspiracy theories. That's my concern. But yet I really appreciate all this research that you did. But I do think you need to take a look at what we're doing, even if it's, you can't watch all the videos, but you need to spend an organized amount of time every day looking at these things, studying them, and trying to sort out what it is we're saying. And when I say we, well, there's lots of different voices in their movement. There isn't some organized leadership that has the authority to say, you should be able to teach this or you shouldn't be able to teach that, right? I think everybody needs to be heard, and everyone has to make their own individual decision on these points. So any thoughts on that, Odylio?
Well, we've talked about lots of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I finished with the 9/11 quote, because this whole document doesn't make any sense if 9/11 was not a conspiracy.
Yeah, but I'm saying it does. I think it makes more sense. I don't think it makes sense if it's a conspiracy. I wonder how you come to that conclusion. That's the thing that puzzles me.
Yeah,
because you're saying if it's an inside job and it was a conspiracy, that makes this study make sense. And I think it doesn't make sense. I think all the evidence that you presented, the problem is the premises that you have that are underlying it which leads to the conclusions that you draw. Some of your premises are correct, some aren't. But if you're going to say that it had to have been an inside job for this to make sense, I would disagree, because I can make sense of what you presented much better in the context of what we have discovered in our understanding of the daily and Daniel chapter 8, and also our understanding of Samuel Snow's letters, our understanding of the timeline of what's happening in the United States. It makes much more sense by disregarding the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I have to just other way around it. It makes more sense. But
Well,
you said,
no,
yeah,
but you're starting with these premises that I don't agree with. That's why it makes sense. If you start with those premises and accept everything along the way, yeah, then I guess it would make sense. But these premises, we can show that they're not correct. You know,
but just for how do you call it? For as how do you call it? Just theoretically, let's say, I know you don't believe 9/11 was an inside job, but suppose it was, just for discussion's sake, if it was an inside job, would it have a big impact on what we believe so far?
Yeah, it would undermine what we believe so far. Now Dwight did a good presentation dealing with that, of why it undermines our message. You know,
And
because we know that this was not the United States doing this to themselves. This was something that happened to them as a judgment to stop the Sunday law, which was Islam. That's what we teach. And this was actually taught before 9/11 as well. I don't know if you know what Jeff said before 9/11 regarding Islam and the coming Sunday law back in, it would have been the year 2000, so about a year before 9/11. But that's been the position of the movement. The role of Islam and what happened at 9/11, I think, is instrumental for this movement to recognize its foundation and the truth that we're building upon. And if we say it's an inside job, that just undoes our whole movement. So I can't even just, I mean, yes, if it's an inside job, there would be ramifications, but it would mean that we were wrong in almost everything. That would be another message. That wouldn't be Jeff's message. It would say that his foundation that he laid was wrong, and the conclusions that we drew about it afterwards were wrong. And that Islam has nothing to do with this. But yet we also, you're using all these symbols of Islam as if 9/11 is Islam. Right? So I don't think that you can have it both ways. You can't have it as an inside job, the United States just doing a false flag. It doesn't fit anything that we've taught. That's why Jeff was against it. Now, the way he tried to get around it, because he knew that pretty much most of the people who were following this movement were conspiracy theorists. And he said, well, the only thing I can do is if I can make it that at least they will keep following the movement and just kind of appease them by saying, well, let's just accept that it's a restraint of Islam, then he could retain those people in the movement. But he didn't like it. He didn't like the inside job conspiracy theory because he didn't believe it. He tried to teach against it without doing it overtly. He would look at testimonies, 9 testimonies, page 11, and read that section. And he would say, you know, it's God's hand that caused those buildings to fall. And if it's an inside job, it's not God's hand. If it's Islam, it is God's hand. You see the point, right? Because Islam is God's hand, but an inside job can't be God's hand.
But I mean, the temple in Jerusalem in 538 was destroyed by Babylon, right?
In 586, it was destroyed by Babylon.
Sorry, 586.
Destroyed by
Yeah,
Rome.
sorry.
Yeah, and 78 it was destroyed by Rome.
Yeah, but 586, God also said to Ezekiel, "I will take away the pride of your." What was it?
The pride of your
Take
power.
away-
Basically, it's the pride of your power. It's the same thing that's talked about in, it's the exact same phrase in Leviticus 26, verse 18. Or
And
19.
he said,
It's exactly the same Hebrew phrase. Yeah,
the pride of your eyes, he said. I will take away the pride of your eyes. Talking about the temple.
yeah, it's actually the same phrase in Hebrew, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but God said, "I will take away the pride of your eyes." But it was Babylon that destroyed the temple.
Right. So Babylon is the instrument that God used. Islam is also God's instrument. But if you do it to yourself, that's not God doing it. You understand what I'm saying? If you have 9/11 as an inside job, that's not God's judgment against the United States. That's just a trick the United States is playing, right?
I see it like United States being also the glorious land, New York being the financial capital city of the world, and Babylon is something outside of the United States. Babylon is Rome, modern Rome.
Well, in this case, it's Islam that's outside of the United States.
But from a conspiracy point of view, I see it as Babylon being the one that destroyed the World Trade Centers.
But if it's the United States doing it to itself,
no, not the United States.
It's not even a catastrophe. It's just a deception of the United States. It's just them playing a game so that they could somehow bring in the Patriot Act. So it's not Babylon bringing a judgment against the United States. It's not even a judgment at all, because it's just them doing it to themselves. It's a false flag event. That's not a judgment. It has to be a judgment, and it has to be Islam if we accept the foundation that was laid down prior to 9/11. Because that foundation allowed us to understand 9/11 correctly. So that's the argument that Dwight's making. I agree with his argument.
But I don't see it by Babylon as the United States. I see it as a bigger, how do you call it, organization that is.
Well, but it doesn't matter how you see it. The fact is, it's still not a judgment coming from Babylon against the United States. If they're doing it to themselves, if they're just doing it to themselves, if it's just an inside job, it's not a judgment of God, is all I'm trying to say. How is it a judgment of God if they're doing it to themselves?
The United States was meant to be the glorious land. They started off well with the Constitution. What is the system?
But that's not answering. But that's not answering the question, really, because you're saying it's an inside job. So if I shoot myself in the foot, it's not a judgment of God. It's me shooting myself in the foot, right? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Anyway, we're going to have to close. So I thank you for all that you presented. I want you to continue to try to study this out. You know, and we can continue this discussion through emails if you want. But for now, we're going to just, you know, I really do appreciate what you've done. So I'm not trying to discourage you in any way. I just don't think I don't think you're considering everything, and I don't agree with your conclusions. But you're allowed to have them. And I think that they need to be examined. So.
And I agree.
What's that?
I want to say, I want to agree with what you were saying about not tolerating the idea of 9/11 being inside job, and I think you shouldn't tolerate it in the sense that I think it's
It has to be addressed,
yeah,
resolved, right?
right.
We can't just let this thing slide and just continue to have people holding different views regarding 9/11. Because if this movement's going to be united, it's definitely going to have to be united on 9/11. Right. And Dwight is making a case that this movement has to be united by December 25th, 2021. So by this year, by the end of this year, this movement has to know its mission. It has to know its message. And if
Because
yeah,
and I know that there are people within this group that do believe 9/11 is inside job, but I don't see how they can be on the fence thinking that it doesn't really matter or something like that, that
Yeah.
9/11 was inside job or not. Or,
right, because it does matter. It definitely changes
does
the
matter.
whole picture.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah.
It's not just an incidental point. It is
Exactly.
fundamental. If it's an inside job, that's going to give us a completely different message than if it's not. And that we
Amen.
agreed upon. Okay. So
Amen.
you want to close with prayer?
Yes.
Okay.
Father in heaven, thank you for our presentation today. Thank you for the way that we can discuss these things. Please help us to think all these things through. Help us to see clearly, Lord, what is truth and what is error. Open our eyes for the deceptions that are out there. Please help us to have discernment. So please guide us and prepare our hearts, Lord, that we are willing and able to accept these truths that you are trying to reveal to us. Help us to continue to study and do the work that we have to do. Help us to prepare for coming crisis. Give us the strength, the power, and energy to make the sacrifices that we need to do. We thank you, Lord, and yes, all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.